Hello, Bible readers. The Joseph narrative reaches its climax in chapter 45. The dream was about rule over Egypt and rule over fathers and brothers, but no one is yet aware that it's all come to pass until chapter 45. In verses 1 to 8, the disclosure is for the family, and only the family, not the empire. And we listeners or readers are not asked by the narrator to leave the room along with the empire. We get to stay with the family and witness the gospel proclamation. The dead one is alive. The abandoned one has returned in power. The dream has had its way. For those of us who are Christians, Jesus followers, there are lots of familiar themes here. Since we are Bible studiers this time around, not just Bible readers, I thought I'd point out a few rhetorical devices that are used in this chapter. The dead one now alive, when he discloses his identity, he says, "I am Joseph." This is how God discloses God's identity too. I am. It's like a royal form of self-proclamation. It's meant to be far more than simply an introduction. It's not just, I am Joseph. I am Joseph. It's a self-assertion that redefines the whole situation. And the reaction is so amazing. The brothers were at first terrified and amazed, much like the witnesses at the empty tomb of Jesus at the end of the Gospel of Mark. The family is suddenly put into a new world. Their old world that wasn't true is now proven to be false. They live in a world where Joseph is. And they had been living in a world where Joseph was. Doesn't it make you wonder, what are the lies that we live in, that the scales will drop from our eyes and our souls as we are told, no, here's how it's been the whole time. Anyway, that's something I think about anyway. And remember, Joseph means added one. By leaving the past to the past, this added one is able to create something new. A world where joy and hope is given to the family of faith, where just a moment ago, before this scene, there was no joy or hope. The third rhetorical device Brueggemann points out is how God is finally given credit in a story that has not explicitly said much about God at all. God sent me to preserve life. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant. This is the key speech in the entire Joseph narrative, the decoder ring, if you will. If we didn't have this speech, we wouldn't be able to make sense of the rest of it. It all only makes sense if you know God is working through the whole thing the whole time. The brother's guilty fear can be put away. The grief of the father, resolved. Any revenge that the powerful Joseph may have still been kind of ruminating on is over. Joseph doesn't need to triumph over his family. Brueggemann says the guilt of the brothers, the grief of the father, the revenge of Joseph, they're all used as means for the disclosure of the hidden call of God, which is the whole point of the narrative, disclosing the hidden call of God. None of that other stuff from the past matters now, for the whole family is now brought to a new moment, like a genuinely new moment. The purposes of God have been at work in, with, and under the human interactions of this family. It's quite a statement about how God works. Humanism is the belief that humans drive all the action of this world. Humans are the most crucial actors. That's humanism. This narrative claims something very different, that God is free, and in God's freedom, God can work for God's purposes, in spite of, or through, or against every human effort. Humans still get choice completely. For sure, free will happens. God fully honors the work of God's creatures. But the free will of humans does not negate or take away God's ability to do what God wants. It doesn't take away God's ability to work in spite of, to work through, or to work against humans' every effort. So here's how Brueggemann puts it. He says, neither the freedom of the creature nor the gracious sovereignty of God is canceled. In other words, both are true. They are not in conflict, nor are they to be equated. God's will makes use of all human action, but is domesticated or limited by nothing. You can't domesticate God. You can't train God to do what you want, and you can't limit God to not do anything God wants. And at the same time, humans have this free will to make choices. They're both true. How many times have I gotten into philosophical debates with high schoolers and college-age kids and adults as they wonder about how our free will can possibly coexist with a God who is more powerful than anything, including our free will? And that's always been this question. This is a Bible camp counselor question. That age is full of that. Well, how can my free will be true? How can God also be true at the same time? Here in this Joseph narrative is the Bible's response. It's not that God or humans are in battle with each other, where one gets to act while the other has to sit by and allow the other to do as they please. Joseph, his brothers and his father, they all do what they do. But God is also doing God's purposes. Sometimes within those human choices, sometimes around the human choices, sometimes in spite of the human choices. But it is clear, God is acting and the people have free will. Both are true. And that leads to the big theological claims that we can take away from this really important chapter. Number one, God is not limited by anything. Number two, God's purposes create. I know we saw this when we looked at creation, but now that human history is moving forward, God is still creating. That is, bringing something new from something old, something alive from something dead. Like God's purposes really create, like really negates the past, can redefine the present, open a future. So God still is doing that creating work in this Joseph narrative. The third thing, so God is not limited, God's purposes create. The third thing is God is gracious. Newness is given from God. It's not earned by the brothers. It's not earned by any of them. So that's the third one. And then number four, God's purpose is hidden and mysterious. And that's a claim that it takes a while to come to peace with. Here's what Brueggemann says about this. That's why this story is that's why story is the proper mode for this faith we share. Story never lingers to explain, but only recites and retells for the wonder found in the telling. Story does not linger in Genesis 1-2, for example, over the miracle of creation. It does not linger in Genesis 18 over the way of the new birth. It does not linger over the amazement of Easter. Biblical faith affirms and moves on, even when we would like to pause in order to analyze or explain. It will linger to relish and discern the wonder, but never to explain. Tomorrow, chapters 46 and 47. I am one with my God. My God is with us, all of us, at all times and in all places.